What a beautiful hall full of love for Balagopal this is. And I was asking myself really, you know, what are we all doing here speaking to people who already know everything that we are about to say? Because I know that maybe almost nowhere in the world is there this deep an understanding of all these issues, whether it's fascism, whether it's caste, whether it's all kinds of revolutionary movements. A lot of this understanding, of course, comes from the writings of Balagopal, and if we should be obsessed with anybody, we should be obsessed with him. So it's so wonderful that all of you are here. Thank you for introducing me. I only understood 2 words in the introduction, Booker Prize and Lighthouse. But anyway, I have been asked to speak about the fascist moment. First, I must apologize to you if I sound incoherent because, you know, for me the last month has been a very difficult month because I just lost my mother, and it was a very, we had a very interesting relationship. I kept saying that we couldn't be together in a room for too long because it was too dangerous, like 2 nuclear powers, you know, in the same space. Flashpoints could happen, but so much of who I am and how I am has been because of her. And so I keep saying my entire life she was the obstacle race that I was negotiating, because she was one of the most unique and amazing women that I have ever met. And I structured myself around her cruelties and her kindness, and now that she's gone, I'm a little unsure of why I'm structured in this way. So if, you know, it's a little difficult for me to make sense and be coherent at this moment in front of a big and very wise and political audience like you. What is the fascist moment? You know, I sometimes have stopped being able to watch television in our country because it is the fundamental structure and enabler of fascism, the mass media. Anyway, I occasionally switch it on just to look at people's faces, you know, because one can't forget the faces of the fascists that are always on our screens. And I just put it on the other day, and the first thing I saw was Muslim men being flogged in Gujarat. And we of course remember just a few years ago Dalit men being flogged in Gujarat. We don't have any time to recover from one moment to the next, because we are just flooded with things to be outraged about. So I'm going to just look through what are the signs of fascism and what are the accepted indicators of fascism. Like Clifton said, it doesn't matter. I mean, we've had many debates about is it fascism or is it not fascism. The point is that we have a regime whose fundamental organization, the RSS, not the BJP, which is the front office of the RSS, but the RSS, whose ideologues have openly embraced fascism. So while we are debating it, they have accepted it, you know. And we are at that stage where I think as we spoke about Balagopal's writings, where he's questioning whether the role of the court is to defend the citizen against the state. Now what we are looking at is a moment where the state and its institutions themselves have conflated with the political party. So there is no the party, the state, and the institutions of democracy, whether it's the media, whether it's the courts, whether it's educational institutions, whether it's the executive, all of it now functions as one thing. You know, it is fused together into a single organism, and that is fascism. When you have a prime minister who openly campaigns saying they want a Congress Mukt Bharat, and the only other national political party is the Congress, you're saying that you want an opposition Mukt Bharat. You're not willing to tolerate any form of opposition. When in 2019, when he won the second term, I remember all of us were just in shock because we were not expecting that result. And we know and believe and suspect all kinds of things of why that result came to be. But when he came out to speak, having defeated, of course, the Congress, having defeated all the parties, the parties of OBC and Dalit parties that rose in the 90s, defeating Mayawati, defeating Lalu, defeating Samajwadi Party, having won a massive majority in parliament without the Muslim vote. So you have actually reduced a whole community of millions of people. Basically, you've told them that their vote doesn't matter. So you have defeated everybody, and you come out, and what do you see on his face? Unhappiness. Unhappiness. Why? Because there are some people who are still standing up. There is the Khan Market gang, there is the Tukda Tukda gang, all of us basically. And totalitarianism means you cannot accept any opposition at all, whatsoever. So we have this country which is more like a continent than a country, with thousands of dialects, hundreds of languages, religions, ethnicities, castes. We are a country of minorities. There isn't actually any majority in this country. And all the violence that we are seeing today of Hindutva, fascism, is that attempt to create a majority, an artificial majority, which actually doesn't exist. You're trying to create it, and it isn't new. You know, when it started with, it started when, long ago, when representative democracy or representative government began to replace imperial power. Then suddenly everyone got anxious about numbers. Until then, it didn't matter that millions of people oppressed by the caste system, by the Hindu caste system, were converting to Islam, were converting to Sikhism, were converting to Christianity. It didn't matter that they didn't manage to escape caste, because caste followed them into those religions. But those moments when this was happening, when this conversion was happening, the millions, it didn't matter, because then numbers didn't matter. Then it was all right to be this exclusive Brahminical society where very few people control everything. But when the anxiety of numbers began, then began Hindutva, and then began the idea of this political religion. Then began the anxiety about conversion. Then began all those meetings, Jat Pat Todak Mandal and Arya Samaj, all of them to woo especially the millions of Dalit people who were converting back into the quote unquote Hindu fold. And that was the beginning of this modern fascism. And for a society that practices caste, it's just a sideways shuffle. For a society that believes that Brahmins are the gods on earth, it's just a side shuffle. Fascism is just a side shuffle. We, way before the Germans started off on Aryan, the belief in the Aryan superhuman, we were doing it in India. So it's very easy for this society to become a fascist society. Clifton, you spoke about how 100% of the sanitation workers are Dalit. Look at the other side of it. Look at the caste of our great industrialists. What is their caste? You know, caste is something that is the engine that runs this country. So Adani, Ambani, Mittal, all of them, what is their caste? What is the caste of the predominant judges in our country, the editors, the owners of media? So we are structurally somewhere between feudalism, apartheid, Nazis, fascism. It's all these layers, one on top of the other. These days I keep thinking about all the struggles that have happened in this country. I mean, in the 1960s and 1970s, these were revolutionary struggles. These were struggles calling for justice. These were struggles calling for the redistribution of wealth and the redistribution of land. These were struggles by working class people, the Naxalite movement. All of that was a struggle where the idea of justice was huge and real, a concept of equality. After those struggles were crushed, of course they keep re-emerging in other forms, but after those struggles were crushed, in the 80s and 90s came what? The anti-displacement struggles. Clifton and I met in the Narmada Valley, and we were just talking about what a profound understanding of the environment, of ecology, of democracy, of all of that, the struggle against that big dam gave us. But what was fundamentally the fundamental argument was not displacement, but the fundamental base on which you could fight against dams which were destroying rivers, which were centralizing resources, which were snatching things away from the poor to give to the rich. The fundamental foothold that movement had was displacement. So from talking about the redistribution of land, the end of zamindari and all that, you come to displacement, where you're just saying, जो हमारे पास है वो मत छीनना, you know. So you come to displacement. That struggle was crushed. Then you come to the NREGA, Narega. Acha, just give people minimum wages for 90 days. Enough for any sort of upper middle class person to have a meal at a nice restaurant one night. So that's all you're asking for. That was being mocked, that was revolutionary, that is impossible. After NREGA now, it's like NRC. You can't even be sure of your citizenship. And as Hannah Arendt said, citizenship is the right to have rights. So now you come to are we really discussing fascism? The only people who at one time said that you can only be a citizen if you produce these sets of documents that we will approve of. In Nuremberg, the Nazis did that. So then you come to NREGA, and now we've come to kya? Ki आपका नमक खा रहे तो हम वोट देंगे. You know, this is the journey of most people in this country, not the fighting people, but otherwise. We have Clifton, you were talking about the fact that so many workers have been communalized. I was in UP actually before the elections. You know, I traveled to many villages and spoke to many people, and on the one hand, the language of the farmers' movement had penetrated into UP, and it was wonderful to hear. A lot of people saying a lot of people who used to be with BJP also understanding कि क्या हो गया. But there were a lot of other people, you know. जैसे कोरोना में गंगा में लाश बह रहे थे और मुझे कह रहे कि नहीं लेकिन मोदी जी नहीं होता तो और भी लाशें होती. No, seriously, you know, the what is it that you know, what is it that makes people who are being humiliated revere the people who are humiliating them? It is a fundamental political question for us, you know, that how is it actually happening, this thing? So I was thinking about it a lot, and I thought, you know, if you sell people a mythological past, like the worker who had Bharat Mata का जो map है दरवाजे पे, you sell people a mythical past in which they were once glorious, and you can take away their future. You know, you can take it away for nothing. You can crush them. You know, those millions of people, when the lockdown was announced, it was biblical to watch that migration of people walking back, you know, and it was incredible to watch in this country. You know, suddenly it was like a chemical experiment. Somebody had poured some chemical on us, and the structures emerged. The people came out, and they began to walk. And in the cities, they were migrant workers. And as they approached their villages, they were whatever caste they were, you know, and they were not all oppressed people. They were also oppressors. So we have a system in this country where the hierarchy of caste has created a people and a society where someone always has someone to be oppressed by and someone to oppress. So it's like a gigantic self-surveillance machine, you know, so very, very dangerous. But I just want to go through a few points about how we have come here in this modern time right now, through international understandings of fascism. And just while I'm on the subject of international, you know, we must be aware that the world is in a very, very dangerous place right now. I was in the Ukraine actually just before COVID, because my books were translated into Ukrainian. I was in Poland and in the Ukraine, and I was shocked, you know, the first time I realized how common people can hate the left because of what had happened to them, you know, because of the unacknowledgement of things that have happened to them. Not in terms of the principles of what socialism is, but what was done in its name and unacknowledged the price that was paid. But anyway, Ukraine now is, the ripples that are coming out, I'm sure many of you are following it, but it is so very, very dangerous. Because that war is not a war that anyone can lose. It can turn into a nuclear war at any time, you know. So you're going to see Europe now facing a kind of winter that it hasn't faced since the Second World War, where there isn't fuel to heat homes and so on. That bitter winter, Russia is also waiting for the winter which always helps it in wars. So it's a very, very dangerous situation in the world right now. And what we are experiencing in this country is being experienced in other places in deeper ways, you know, also. And in all sorts of societies, Islamic societies, European society, American society. In Iran, women are fighting for the right not to wear a hijab. In Karnataka, women are fighting for the right to wear a hijab. It is not an antagonistic struggle. It is all about coercion and control of women to further particular kinds of ideologies. It is to stop women having a choice. And in America, the worst of all, you're fighting enforced pregnancy. You can't have an abortion. You know, so societies are coming apart. But coming back to this, so the point number one is fascism begins with a deep social crisis that is seen as a threat to existing social hierarchies. So we all remember in the 80s what was happening in the late 80s when Balagopal was writing. You had the Mandal Commission, you had the fear of the dominant caste people worrying about OBC reservations, you had the anti-Mandal protests, and then you had, of course, the Babri Masjid thing a little later. You had at that time the opening of two locks. I've spoken about this many times. In the late 80s, when Afghanistan fell, when Soviet communism ended and India became totally aligned, you had two locks that were open. One, the lock of the Babri Masjid, and the other, the lock of the market. And those unleashed two kinds of fundamentalisms, economic fundamentalism and Hindutva fundamentalism. And those two kinds of fundamentalisms had two enemies. At the extreme end, you had everyone who resists this neoliberal economy is a Maoist, an urban Naxal, as we all know now, as all of you and we are, I guess. So you had that, and then you had Islamic terror. Both were used to make the state into a police state from then on to now. Second, a longing for a mythic national past, fantasizing about a super pure racial Superman. Of course, we've talked about that. And you have people actually doing experiments and eugenic experiments even now, you know, talking about this super Aryan and so on. And you have a very odd situation in India where on the one hand, the sort of dominant caste Hindus claim to be Aryans who've come from somewhere, and on the other hand, they're in the jungle doing ghar wapsi to Adivasi people who've always been here, you know. Then you have a mass movement with the support of some sectors of the national ruling class. So there was the Rath Yatra, there was the distraction from all the chaos being caused by neoliberalism as well as the Mandal Commission. So you had all this coagulating into the idea of Hindu pride. When you're talking about Modi saying that there are only two castes, the poor and those who want to save the poor from poverty, of course, I'm sorry to say this isn't Modi's idea, it was Gandhi's idea. You know, it started then. And you had, yeah, and I have to say that we are a nation of extremely dishonest people. When we look at this person, I won't get into it now, but you also had the same, you know, when you're talking about sanitation workers, in The Doctor and the Saint, I have an essay written by Gandhi called My Ideal Bhangi, in which he talks about how privileged people are to clean other people's shit, you know. And it is so disgusting to belong to a society like this. It is so shameful, you know, and to make politics out of dealing with sewage, to try and make Mahatmas out of dealing with sewage. Everyone does it in the world. People deal with their own sewage except in India. You know, it's really very, very sad. But the fourth is the emergence of a single dominant authoritarian party, the fabrication of an external and internal threat to the nation, often racial, religious, or ethnic in form. Now, you know, if you remember what happened in 2001, when the World Trade Towers went down, when the world turned openly when it turned openly Islamophobic, when Islamophobia was an accepted mode of politics. 3 weeks later or 6 weeks later, Modi was appointed, not elected, but appointed the Chief Minister of Gujarat. Then you look at the events that followed. I have written about it a lot, so I mean in great detail. But then you had the parliament attack. You had the Supreme Court coming out with a judgment years later, which sort of, I'm just paraphrasing now, but it said, we have no evidence to prove that Mohammed Afzal is a member of a terrorist organization, but in order to satisfy the collective conscience of society, we are sentencing him to death. You remember the atmosphere after the parliament attack. Then you had Godhra and the massacre in Gujarat. And today you have the people who have Mihir and Tista Setulwad, people who have documented so carefully evidence of what happened there. Today they are in the dock. Today they are in jail. Today the Adivasis who were killed in Gompad's relatives are in the dock. Himanshu Kumar is in the dock. You're not allowed to speak about massacre. You had the NRC protests ending in a massacre in Delhi. Now for Muslims it's a crime to be murdered, you know. And those who are speaking about peace, speaking about the constitution, they're the ones who are in jail today. The foreclosure of democratic or autonomous means of expression. So here you have two things. One is what has been done to the media. The structure of the media is intrinsically a conflict of interest, because obviously it's corporate owned or the money comes from corporate advertising. But you also have today Adani, who we spoke about earlier, doing a hostile takeover of NDTV. Adani, whose plane symbolically with the name flashed all across the body of the plane, Adani, Modi flew from Ahmedabad to Delhi to take over the job of the Prime Minister of this country. It was a message. Within 8 years, Adani's wealth has grown from $8 billion to $139 billion. Yesterday, I don't know how many of you followed, but Adani was in Rajasthan, where there's a Congress government. And if you look at the body language of the politician bowing to him, Adani ho, Ambani ho, Amit Shah ka beta Jay Shah ho, yahan pe swagat hai aapka. ठीक है? So it's the equivalent of the hostile takeover of NDTV. You have this entire project of fascism is underwritten by corporate capital. And Adani, you cannot become the second richest man in the world in 7 years, you know. You cannot, unless you're merged with the state, unless you are the state, unless laws are being written to facilitate that. So there is this issue. Now if you look at it a little closer, the media, I mean, all of us know. I was just telling someone yesterday that all of us talk about the news. All of us talk about what fake news is and how news has been taken over and manipulated. But I'm sure not many of you, I mean, I certainly don't watch these TV serials, you know, on these channels. But even if you're walking past one and walking from one room to next, in every frame there is the signaling of fascism. In every frame. And that is far stronger than fake news. I'm a writer and I know that fiction is stronger than fact, you know, because it addresses something at some other level. So okay, the news. But then we have the machinery. The other way we express ourselves is through voting. So you have the machinery of voting now. I'm not talking just about the EVM, but look at the funding, the electoral bonds, which has made entirely anonymous how political parties can be funded. And now they've changed, I think yesterday only, they changed the laws of CSR, corporate social responsibility, to make them more opaque so that that money too can go to political parties. So you have, on the one hand, a political party that's not counting Adani's money, you know, but whether Adani is a politician or the politicians are corporations, we leave that matter for another day, but not counting Adani's money, I'm saying, you have such a hugely rich political party. Demonetization hit the working class, it also hit all political parties. They were just emptied out, you know. So now you're watching elections, it's like watching a BMW racing a bullock cart. Economically, the only thing is that bullock carts and cycles can go to places that BMWs can't go into. So that's our hope, you know, that's our hope. Eighth is the existence of street fighting elements or militias to intimidate and terrorize, and in some cases murder opposition forces. Here also we don't, I mean, I don't need to tell you what I'm talking about, but also to understand that these militias are now, again, you know, the whole new recruitment policy for the army. What happens to those people after they serve 4 years? You know, who do they then serve? And there are also schools, training schools, universities being started by Hindutva Sangh Parivar people to train people to get into the army. So again, you have the privatization, not just of violence, but the privatization of trained armed cadre, which is what we have to think about. And of course, the ninth is the militarized rhetoric of masculinity, anti-feminism, casteism, and the 10th is paranoia. And paranoia is Pegasus, okay? Not just spying on you, but taking over your identity and then manipulating it. I was telling our friends today that, you know, speaking in this hall and speaking at the Delhi Press Club often makes me so sad, because the people who used to organize these events, the people with whom I was sitting at this table, are all in jail today. You know, some of the greatest minds in our country are in jail today. So I'll just going to end with a 3-minute reading, because believe me, I'm a better writer than I am a speaker. But this is just, it's an essay called The Graveyard. Actually it was a lecture called The Graveyard Talks Back. And it's about, it's a lot to do, it's from this book called Azadi, Fascism and Fiction and the Freedom in Time of the Virus. But it's about writing and writers and language. A lot of the essays are here about how in India language was partitioned before the land was partitioned, you know, into Urdu and Hindi, and how basically Gaurakshaks, this Hindustan movement, all of them started together, you know. And of course the irony is the Hindi, Hindu, Hindustan, they're all Persian words borrowed by Hindutva forces. But I'm just going to talk, it's just a little passage about writing and fascism. In the previous part, I'm talking about how, you know, what is being done to the imagination of writers. And I mention all of this only in order to think aloud about how this continuous, unceasing threat affects writers and their writing. Each one of us reacts differently, of course. Speaking for myself, as the pressure mounts and the windows are shut one by one, every cell of my writing brain seems to want to force them open again. Does that shrink writers or expand them, sharpen them or blunt them? Most people, I imagine, believe it would restrict a writer's range in imagination, steal away those moments of intimacy and contemplation without which a literary text does not amount to very much. I've often caught myself wondering if I were to be incarcerated or driven underground, would it liberate my writing? Would what I was writing become simpler, more lyrical perhaps, and less negotiated? It's possible, but right now, as we struggle to keep the windows open, I believe our liberation lies in the negotiation. Hope lies in texts that can accommodate and keep alive our intricacy, our complexity, our density, against the onslaught of the terrifying, sweeping simplifications of fascism. As they barrel towards us, speeding down their straight, smooth highway, we greet them with our beehive, our maze. We keep our complicated world with all its seams exposed alive in our writing. After 20 years of writing fiction and non-fiction that tracks the rise of Hindu nationalism, after years of reading about the rise and fall of European fascism, I've begun to wonder why fascism, although it is by no means the same everywhere, is so recognizable across histories and cultures. It's not just the fascists that are recognizable, the strongman, the ideological army, the squalid dreams of Aryan superiority, the dehumanization and ghettoization of the quote-unquote internal enemy, the massive and utterly ruthless propaganda machine, the false flag attacks and assassinations, the fawning businessmen and film stars, the attacks on universities, the fear of intellectuals, the specter of detention camps, and the hate-fueled zombie population that chants the Eastern equivalent of Heil, Heil, Heil. It's also the rest of us, the exhausted, quarreling opposition, the vain, nitpicking left, the equivocating liberals who spent years building the road that has led to the situation we find ourselves now, and are now behaving like shocked, righteous rabbits who never imagined that rabbits were an important ingredient of the rabbit stew that was always on the menu. And of course, the wolves who ignored the decent folks' counsel of moderation and sloped off into the wilderness to howl unceasingly, futilely, and if they were female, then shrilly and hysterically at the terrifying misshapen moon. All of us are recognizable. So at the end of it all, is fascism a kind of feeling in the way anger, fear, and love are feelings that manifests itself in recognizable ways across cultures? Does a country fall into fascism the way a person falls in love? Or more accurately, in hate? Has India fallen in hate? Because truly the most palpable feeling in the air is the barbaric hatred the current regime and its supporters show toward a section of the population. Equally palpable now is the love that has risen to oppose this. This was written at the time of the protests against NRC. You can see it in people's eyes and hear it in protesters' song and speech. It's the battle of those who know how to think against those who know how to hate. A battle of lovers against haters. It's an unequal battle because the love is on the street and vulnerable. The hate is on the street too, but is armed to the teeth and protected by all the machinery of the state. So eventually, I believe that what we are witnessing now is the hatred is knife. It's a sharp cutting knife. And we are the ocean. And a knife cannot cut the water. Cannot. So don't lose hope. Seriously, we just do what we have to do. And I just want to say one thing, do not waste your energy on, we do have to hope that these political parties will get together and oppose the BJP, because those who are against Hindutva are not the same as those who are for Hindutva, but they are all for Adani. And as we know, that process, how it will end, we don't know, but we have to do what we have to do, you know. So we have to, every little street corner matters. It's not just the big stuff. Thank you very much. Inqilab Zindabad. Jai Bhim. Lal Salam.